Okay, council.
I don't know, man. He didn't.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special welcome to those who are joining us virtually, as well as those who have accompanied us live in the council chamber. This is Monday, August 28th. This is our monthly planning meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First of all, we have our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land on which we are gathered today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as Shinnebi. And through the connection of the Shinnebi with the spirit of the land, water, and air, we recognize their unique cultures, traditions, and values. Together, as treaty people, we have a shared responsibility to act with respect for the environment that sustains all life, protecting the future for those generations to come. Council, our first item is declaration of a pecuniary interest. If you have any, please declare it at the proper time. Those that are joining us in the council chamber, I would ask you to please put your phones or communication devices either off or on vibrate, please. The only one that I will allow on this evening is our Director of Public Works, because we have an issue with our side road near the CN track. So he's on standby for that. So. Clerk, are there any delegations this evening?
No items at this time.
Okay. Go to item number 5, business arising from the previous meetings. Anything on that, clerk?
No items.
Okay. Item 6, staff reports. 6.1. The motion by Councillor Bojan, second by Councillor Van Claveren, that the report by Ken Melanson, Manager, Planning and Development Services, regarding 5955 South Plympton Road zoning map issue be received and staff be instructed to, number 1, initiate a zoning bylaw amendment to correct the zoning map issue at the subject site and to return to council for a decision as soon as possible. Number 2, consider the application as a mapping error, require no additional information processed in the zoning bylaw amendment. Number 3, apply no fee to this application as it will be initiated by the town. Mr. Melanson, welcome. Thank you for taking time to join with us today. I know you're on an assignment at this time. Is there anything you'd like to add to your report before I call on council to ask any questions that they may have?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Just on assignment vacation, but no, I think the report is pretty clear, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, council, do you have any questions? Beginning on my left, Councillor Wolvet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Ken, just want you to explain this a little bit more. I'm not the only one that's just a wee bit confused on some of this, especially on the drawings. What we're looking at here is a couple of different things here. We're looking at hazardous district here. We're looking at woodland. And it looks like the existing dwelling that was built in 1977 is what's confusing this, is what the way I read into it. It looks like in 1977, land was cleared to put this new house on back in 1977. Right or wrong? I know you explained it in your report about your GIS lines not being that accurate at the time, and they're more accurate now. It looks to me you're moving the house, putting the new house probably in a better location from what I can see than what the original house was by moving it further away from the woodlot. So I'm not sure where your GIS line is here for your hazardous or your woodlot land. Is it the blue line that's running through the new location that's in dispute?
So through Your Worship, I'm just going to see if I can share my screen here because I have the county GIS map open.
Okay.
And just since I'm not with you in council chambers, I believe Mr. Kerrigan himself may actually be present. So if I get anything wrong, he may be able to provide some additional clarity. So can you just confirm that you can see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So what you're looking at is the county's zoning map for Plympton, Wyoming. So you can see the hazard area, which I'm circling my mouse on, which is the hatched. Everything else in this area above the blue line is zoned woodlot, right here. And then everything below the line on this side, not in the hatched area, is agriculture. So the existing dwelling, you can see, is right here. So the proposed new dwelling would be somewhere in around here. So you are correct, it would be moving away, but the problem is that it's in the woodlot zoning. And the woodlot zone does not allow any single detached dwellings. So from an approvals perspective, we actually need to move the line. And just to take council back a step, it's not uncommon for some of these circumstances to arise in the way that they have in this circumstance. Because when we go through a zoning bylaw review, a property owner may not be aware that this circumstance exists. So they don't know to reach out to staff, and conversely, staff would not necessarily know about this issue until an inquiry happens. So this is not, it's not uncommon, it's rare, but it does happen. When you see this, and staff would know, is a situation where you've written a completely new zoning bylaw. And I'll give you an example. I'm currently in Calgary. So the city of Calgary wrote a new zoning bylaw, which had a whole new regulatory regime. So they knew that in the process of transitioning from one to another, there would likely be some errors of transition, and gave staff direction to correct those issues. But that's not the case here. We haven't really done a new bylaw in at least a decade. We are due for a zoning bylaw update, which, as we noted in the report, is likely going to launch later this year. But because this came about and the house is going to be located in this area, which is zoned woodlot, we do need to move the line. And this does appear, based on what we've been able to find, to be a form of a mapping error that was just never discovered by either the property owner or staff until now. I hope that answers your question, Councilor.
It does, but so are you moving the blue line straight up, which will be above the new home? Or you moving that blue line too?
Through your worship, likely what we would do is snap the line to follow this cleared area, so that it would allow for the dwelling in there. I don't think we've put our minds to exactly what it is, because I don't know if we have the most recent up-to-date aerial mapping. And so it may be worth going out for another site visit just to really get a full understanding of where that cleared area stops, so that we can do the mapping correctly. But you are correct, the line would essentially snap to this edge and then move up closer to the woodlot, but not into it.
Yeah, that certainly would make sense to me, since there's already a house there. I certainly can't see any harm moving or building a new house, whatever direction that is to the south of that. So yeah, okay, that explains it. One other thing, is there any livestock buildings anywhere near where you're going to build the new house?
Through your worship, I don't have an answer for that. If the property owner is in the audience, he might be able to answer that.
Yes, Mr. Kerrigan is here. Mr. Kerrigan, could you answer that for us?
Not in the vicinity of where that house is gonna be built, no.
That's all I have, sir.
Councilor Van Claveren?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a chance, if we apply for a variance to that bylaw, is that to suit the province? I'm not sure I understand fully who we're approving that for. Is that just for the county of Lambton? Can you answer that for me, Mr. Melanson?
Yes, through your worship, in order for the applicant or the property owner to pursue building a new dwelling, the zoning line has to change. So the report that is before you is asking for council to consider it a mapping error and direct us to correct it. That doesn't mean that if you say no, then it won't get corrected. It will just mean that the property owner will have to make their own application. But this is one of these circumstances where it does appear that there was an error on our part. from what we can find at this point. That said, there isn't a variance that's allowed. When you have a zone that says you can't have a use because it's not listed, there's no ability to vary that. The only way to change that is to rezone, which is through a council decision. So there's a required public meeting and notices that are required. So regardless, this will come back to council for a decision. But a variance would not assist.
Okay, thank you. And this process could happen pretty quickly?
Through your worship, the reason why we're specifically asking you to deem this to be a mapping error is to expedite the process.
Okay.
And to deem the level of requirement for the application to be minimal so that we can get this moving forward.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy?
If this is deemed a mapping error, then how is it going to be processed and how fast? And I don't quite understand why this can be done. Just here we go. It's a mapping error, but nobody knows about it. Does it not have to go through the actual zoning, rezoning? I know you have the suggestion, but I just wonder why it's even available. This mapping error situation.
So through your worship, because the dwelling is going to be proposed in the woodlot zone where the use is not allowed, it does need to have a rezoning to shift this line on the zoning map up, which is unfortunate. And had this been caught in previous zoning bylaw updates, then we probably would have been ahead of ourselves. This is kind of a unique situation where natural heritage mapping is not always 100% accurate. It's been evolving over time. And unfortunately, we're in this situation where this line is going to have to change to facilitate what the property owner is seeking. That said, property owner could move the house into the A1 area. That would not require a rezoning, but it's our understanding that that creates some challenges in relation to connection to septic and well and attaching to those existing features.
So how long is this going to take?
Through your worship, if you are deeming this to be an error and there's not, and you're scoping it as we've suggested, I suspect that this will be back before you by the end of the year at the latest.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one question. How long has this been, how long did it take to get to us?
Through your worship, I believe it's been about a month of trying to figure out some options and what the next steps would be.
So it's only been a month since this owner has applied?
Through your worship, thereabouts. I don't have an exact date. But it is a recent.
I had a site meeting in April with Isabel.
So
King and-
through your worship, a previous staff member was working on the file and through that transition, it's been about a month since myself and Ken have been working with Mr. Kerrigan to kind of get us to this step. However, this option was presented back in April when myself, Ella, and a previous staff member had went out and took a look at the subject property.
Thank you, Burke. Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. Sanitary question.
Thank you, yes.
Councilor Bojan?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one quick question. Personally, I have no issue with the recommendation here. My one question would be just going back to the timeline thing. I know in the report, it says that the SCRCA has indicated that there is no further things required from Mr. Kerrigan. How strong is that indicated? Like, are we gonna have to, is the property owner gonna have to run into the Conservation Authority at some point, or is it, they made it pretty clear that it's just us that needs to do this?
Through your worship, it's been my understanding that they've been involved throughout this process. So I don't anticipate there to be any hiccups, but that said, depending on council's decision tonight, we will reach out and make sure that that is the case, because I know we've been dealing with our woodlots conservation officer specifically, but he has been working with their staff in the background as well. So we will make sure that that process is as smooth as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Bojan. So, Mr. Melanson, following up on what Councilor Bojan said, do you feel it's comfortable that the woodlot officer as well as conservation, you think that that's heading in a positive direction?
For your worship, that's correct. That's my understanding.
Deputy Mayor?
Could we ask Mr. Kerrigan how soon he wants to build?
Good. Mr. Kerrigan, do you know approximately when you'd like to build?
Well, my wife would like to build right away, but as far as it'd be next spring would be timeline.
Yes, you always have to check with that higher authority, don't you? Sure. Council, anything else? All right, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Opposed
What are we voting in favor
Which
of?
one?
on this motion?
Can you read the motion, please?
I could, yes. Moved by Councilor Bojan, seconded by Councilor Van Claveren, that the report by Ken Melanson, Manager Planning and Development Services regarding 5955 South Plympton Road. Zoning map issue be received and staff be instructed to, number one, initiate a zoning bylaw amendment to correct the zoning map issue at the subject site and to return to council for decision as soon as possible. Number two, consider the application as a mapping area and require no additional information for processing of the zoning bylaw amendment. Number three, apply no fee to this application as it will be initiated by the town. You're clear? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Okay. Okay. Now let's go to 6.2. Second house agreement update. Moved by Councilor Van Claveren, seconded by Councilor Bojan, that the report by Randy Burke, planner dated August 2nd, 2023 regarding second house agreement updates be received and staff be instructed to proceed as presented. Ms. Burke, is there anything that you'd like to add to your report? I know council's had a chance to review it. Is there anything you'd like to add?
So through you, your worship, kind of recommendations throughout here were done throughout myself, the planning department, building services, as well as the town clerk. So it was kind of a team effort, I guess you could say there. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or potentially Erin as well, if it pertains to her.
Okay. The council will open for questions. Councilor Bojan?
Thank you, Worship. I do have one question. So I know that there's this suggested fee of $80 for a second house agreement extension. Am I reading it correctly that the way it's written right now is that if there's any extension, so they require their first extension, are they paying that $80 for their first extension and then going forward every time they need an extension?
You want to speak to it, Randy?
Do you mind, just because it's based on the comprehensive fee or the
Sure.
facility?
I think staff was suggesting that it be $80 because we've given 2 years at that point. And then when that extension's needed, then that would be the first time. And then it would only have one extension approved by staff, and then after that, it would have to come back to council.
So the $80 would be for that staff.
Staff, yeah.
That's the only question I had. Thank you.
Councilor Rodriguez?
So when it did come to council for approval, when it was the 6 month, which it currently is, wasn't there a fee attached to that as well?
Through your worship. So it was originally 12 months plus 1 month, so 13 months, and there was no fee at all for that. So we wanted to institute a fee.
I've only ever seen the 6 month.
Extension request. Yeah, no, there was no, sorry, there was no fee
I'm
for,
still new.
there's no fee. Yeah, you only got the extension.
Yeah.
There was no fee for an initial one agreement, and there was no fee for an extension.
Oh, okay.
So,
I thought there was.
so this would be like cost recovery fee.
Deputy Mayor?
No questions.
Councilor Van Claveren?
Nothing for me, sir.
Councilor Wolvet?
Nothing for me.
The question I have, that item number 2, now I have no issue with the proposal. The only reservation I have is relating to line 2. What mechanism is in place are you proposing to be in place for staff to notify council when an extension is given to that second house after the 24 months? Because I know now we hear about it. What proposal are you going to have for that?
Through your worship, I would propose that it go on recommended reading for council. The planning agenda. And same format as it came back before, just not in a staff report. Instead, it would be under recommended reading to let council know that that's.
Plannings's okay with that?
Through your worship, yes.
All right, Deputy?
Is that going to be before, like that there's a request in, or after it's already approved in our recommended? Or just sort of, we know ahead of time, you know?
I guess timing is planning's once a month. If staff's granted the permission through this to provide that initial extension, then I think it would be, as soon as we give that, the next meeting would be appropriate.
That's your question,
I
Deputy?
did. Thank you.
No further questions? Okay, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Got a new way of doing things. Thank you, staff, for putting that together. Okay, council, we're gonna go to 6.3. A motion by Councilor Rodriguez, seconded by Councilor Bojan, that the report by Randy Burke, planner dated August the 3rd, 2023, regarding short-term rentals, public engagement summary, and next steps be received, and staff be instructed to proceed as presented. Okay, Ms. Burke, do you have anything to add to your comprehensive report? I must say, it was the first time I've seen it, and I think council has not seen it before either, so it was a well put together report.
Thank you, your worship. I do. So today we're here to discuss short-term rentals in the town of Plympton-Wyoming. Specifically after providing council with an overview of the findings from the public engagement sessions completed throughout the last couple of months, and to discuss next steps. So the report highlights the process taken during each engagement session and provides vital findings representing the public's opinions of short-term rentals and the possibility of regulations. An example of the boards were provided to council. They were used to gather public opinions. That way you could have a visual representation of what was discussed. However, all boards have been digitalized and will be made available on the town website for yourselves and the public if they wish. So now that council has been provided with the findings from these public engagement sessions, it's the responsibility of council to make a decision and direct staff on next steps. As the report highlights, if council decides to move forward, this would include staff preparing a zoning bylaw and licensing framework to be presented to council. This direction would include a scheduled public meeting with notice provided in accordance with the Public Act, or Planning Act, sorry. Please note that if this option is chosen, if council desires, there will still be off-ramps, and this does not mean a regulatory framework will be implemented. The other option is not moving forward with a regulatory framework and directing staff to stop looking into short-term rentals. If this option is chosen, then short-term rental process, including any complaints, etc., will stay the same. Staff note that a number of correspondence items were received, and some members of the public have expressed that they wish for council to prohibit short-term rentals. It is vital that council understands that the province of Ontario does not allow for prohibition of the use of a short-term rental, but the Municipal Act does allow towns to regulate them. Staff are recommending that council proceed with moving forward with the creation of a short-term rental bylaw and licensing program. Again, it is important to note that there will be other off-ramps throughout this process should the opinion of council change. If there are any questions about the public engagement finding, I'm happy to answer them to the best of my abilities. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Burke, because I know you came in halfway through on this project and picked it up, so thank you very much. So council, we've all had a chance to read Ms. Burke's report. I'm going to open it for council for comments and questions, beginning with Counselor Wolvett. Do you have anything you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, let me say this is a very complicated situation. Because there are people with short-term rentals in this community that depend on them. And the ones that I'm speaking of mostly are the ones where the owner resides in that home. And in a lot of these cases, these short-term rentals are very beneficial to the community with construction workers, people moving into the area that need short-term accommodation. So I'm being very careful here to kind of keep these things defined differently. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have a rental house, I want to keep that separate from a person that's renting out one room in their own home, so to speak, that type of thing. So when I look at this total report and I look at some of this stuff, it could really restrict some of the people that depend on their property to be rented out. So what I'm looking for is a little more defined definition of exactly who we are talking about. Are we talking about that individual that has a home, say here in Wyoming, that maybe just rents out one room to one person for 2 months, 3 months? Will they be under the same rules? Will they have to do the same registration, pay the same fees? I think that's what I'm not reading into a lot of this, and maybe we haven't got there yet, quite that in depth.
So through you, your worship, to answer that, so a short-term rental is anything under 28 days consecutively. So if it was a month, 2 months, that would be a long-term rental and would fall under kind of the Tenancies Act. That's a whole other regulatory system. However, in terms of someone renting a room in their house for a weekend, a week, 2 weeks, that would fall under the short-term rental regulations.
Would it? Okay.
And I see Ken has his hand up there as well.
Okay, Mr. Melanson, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, just to add to what Randy is saying, you're at the point now where we're suggesting to you to develop a regulatory framework. So you're going back to one of your comments, Counselor, you are not there yet because there isn't a definition that creates that defining line between the two. And I see where you're going. That would form part of the work that would occur should council give us direction.
That's some of the questions that people have been asking me, people that have rental units. They're worried that they're going to be affected so much that they basically will just, have to close down or whatever. People that depend on some of this stuff for their income. So I'm being very careful there. Other comments like that's been brought to this council are these short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, which is probably creating some of the biggest issues here. People buy a house out there in the lake and rent it out every night for 30, 40 people, and these are residential neighborhoods. The question was asked, are these commercial establishments, and are they being registered and as commercial? And I don't see anything in here related to that, because that was a specific question asked. I don't know if you asked them at your open houses, but it was an issue around commercial versus if somebody buying a cottage and not declaring what they're doing with it.
So through your worship, and Ken, if you want to chime in at any point, I guess that is my understanding. Short-term rentals are a residential use. A single detached dwelling through the zoning lens, a single detached dwelling would be permitted. That's where we see the lines blur and why a lot of towns and municipalities are putting in short-term rental bylaws, because you're allowed to have a home occupation under certain circumstances, things of that sort. So this is where we see that question of, is it commercial, is it residential, really line up, but there was zoning potential for the zoning lens, like a single detached dwelling would be permitted. And if Ken wants to dive in on that as well, his hand is up.
Thanks, Randy. The only thing I'll add is if you think back to your zoning bylaw, one of the things that is actually allowed in your residential zones today is a bed and breakfast. And that's actually sort of the closest use that municipalities have been able to sort of mash these short-term vacation rentals to fit into as an interim solution. But that's not always the best use to fit, because usually what you'll see with that type of use is that it has to be owner occupied. And there are some instances where you have someone owning the dwelling, but they don't occupy the unit that's rented out for a short term. So that's part of why we're suggesting it's time for us to look into a regulatory framework. The key here is to understand that when you cross the line into commercial, it's usually when you get into a motel, hotel, and you're talking about a purpose-built building that has a number of these units into it too. And so Randy's correct. We've gotten to a point where originally, many years ago, the concern was when you have a house being rented out on a long-term basis to tenants, regardless of who they are. Now that tenancy itself has gotten even shorter with these short-term vacation rentals, and the turnover is faster. So part of this is developing a regulatory framework, and it's really important for council to understand that the zoning bylaw isn't going to solve everything. It's going to set some parameters, but a licensing system is really what's going to be the key to the success or the lack of success as we move forward.
Okay, that's great. And one final thing, and I'm looking at the noise part of your report here. Yeah, I think we'd be in trouble on my own street, to be quite honest with you, if we enforced all of this. You know, especially during the summer months out along that lake where I certainly live. You know, outdoor backyard gatherings or activities involving excessive noise or disruptive behavior. Fireworks, I certainly agree with you, shouldn't be having fireworks in your backyard, but there's a whole list of stuff there that we don't have a noise bylaw here, and we've resisted it for many different reasons, and especially being agriculture and not having to shut down whole neighborhoods from having their little street parties and stuff. So some of that stuff there, I know I was sent an email here just in the last couple of days about an individual saying, like, the one thing you do need to address here is your noise, and have some kind of bylaw or some bylaw officer to go and stop it. And I certainly agree with the bylaw officer being able to go out there and say, hey, to these here short-term rentals, like, shut her down. So that was an issue a lady had with me here just in the last couple of days, saying you can put all this stuff into place if you want, but if you don't have any enforcement and you're not going to go adhere to the bylaw, then you might as well forget putting one out there. So that's all the comments I have.
Thank you, Councilor Wolbett. Councilor Van Claveren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks to the planning department for that in-depth report. You folks have spent a lot of time on it. And I think you've shown respect to folks that have shown interest, and it affects them. Maybe their neighbors, maybe they have a vested interest, maybe they have short-term rentals of their own. I contend, since we started discussing these short-term rentals, that through it all, we've been trying to learn about them. Where there's contractors in place that are already doing this work. So, but I think you folks having done what you did, it shows great respect to those that it affects. But again, there's already contractors that are managing a great number of short-term rentals, doing so very successfully, maintaining noise control, certain select and appropriate surveillance, and we don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. We don't have to shoulder great expense for staffing, or bylaw officers, unless they're really needed. But I really think, and that's certainly my opinion, that bringing some contractors in to explain what they're already doing will mitigate a lot of this, what the planning department is now doing, and there's still trial and error to take place. The trial and error has already been done by the contractors. So here's how it could be seen. So you might have a short-term rental. You would have to employ the services of a approved contractor. That contractor would need to register these properties with the town. And then from there on, that contractor and then the property owner would do their business. If there's issues following that, well, then we'd have to address them. But I see it happening. It's happened for generations, but now is where it's taken on a more formal tone, like in short-term rentals. Before, people just rented cottages forever. But now it's more formal. We need professionals in place. And I think it would lighten the planning department, the town, and our expenses greatly. That's my thoughts, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council. Deputy?
Yeah, this is interesting what Clavin is talking about, but this contractor that you're referring to. Yes, can't hear you. Can't hear me?
That girl.
Good girl.
I know that's a rarity.
Yeah, is that on camera? Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so what does this contractor, would they also enforce the rules?
Totally.
Totally, okay, because I definitely not think we need rules around these STRs.
Mhm.
And I myself think they should have a person living in that building, you know, while they rent this place out, because that would certainly contain noise and parking and everything else that goes along with it, but and they would do the licensing also?
They could, sure, if we decide that they need to have
Yeah.
each person licensed,
Like
or
my
certainly register each homeowner, property owner with the town, so we're aware of them.
Okay, so no, I'm just thinking, my first choice is not to even have them, but I don't think that's gonna work. So this contracting business sounds very interesting, but I think let's get going on this bylaw to enforce or to hire this type of contractor, because time keeps slipping away. Let's hope to have this kind of thing under control for next year. It's taken way too long. That's it for now.
I might just add one little thing, Mr. Mayor, please, and thanks. This would be different than Airbnb. This would be different than somebody employing the promotional tools of the Airbnb circuit. This is a contractor, a local contractor that manages short-term rentals. They're hands-on, they're involved.
So we'd need a security firm to enforce anything that goes wrong, or did they enforce the problems too?
Well, I contend that we need to have some of these contractors presenting their case to us.
Oh, okay.
So, if I may, property management companies is what they're called. And there are several in the area, and probably the majority of Airbnbs use property management companies. So that's what they're referred to.
Too, but the ones that don't use it, they need some control.
Correct.
It's not a commercial area along the lake or anywhere else.
A couple of them specialize in short-term rentals.
Mr. Sabansky?
I think that's some really good discussion. I think looking into how we manage short-term rentals is very important. Want to be careful though, because if we are looking at requiring people to use a certain contractor to have an Airbnb, you're bringing in that regulation where this is the town's approved contractor. This is how we shall use for management. So you'll be possible, and there are possibly numerous companies in Plympton-Wyoming area who's provide that service. So then you're looking at possibly at a competitive process to hire that contractor to ensure that our residents are getting the best value for that price that we'd be forcing upon them for that management. So I don't know if that would speed things up due to that procurement process. it may end up being the same as if you develop it and enforce it in-house. So just some food for thought.
Mr. Melanson?
Yes, thank you, your worship. Just to add to what Mr. Savansky was saying. Based on our regulatory review and some discussion with some folks who have dealt with regulation of short-term vacation rentals, what you want to do in establishing your regulations is to recognize what I will call the big picture, which is you're going to have some folks who use a private contractor like Councillor Van Claveren is talking about, that manage their short-term vacation rentals because they have 5, 6, 10, however many. And then what you also want to do is create a regulatory framework that recognizes what Deputy Mayor McEwen is suggesting, which is the one-off, the person who doesn't have that. So what we certainly have seen in other municipalities is that they don't tend to, it doesn't tend to matter to them who the person is that is applying for the license. It's about making sure that you establish a regulatory regime, both from a planning and from a licensing perspective that says, you know, this is the box that you should be operating in. And if you're, you know, follow these rules and work within this box, whether you're a property management company representing Ken's 10 properties or you're Randy who has one, you're operating the box, you're not creating a problem. And then when you step outside the box, there's someone from the municipality and says, uh-oh, you've stepped outside, you need to address it. And it's that company or individual that is the primary contact for the municipality to then go to and say, there's an issue here, go and address it. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez?
Thank you so much. All right, so we do have a small percentage of short-term rentals when compared to our population size, but it's important to put some sort of framework in place. Because it could grow with rooms, so we do need some sort of baseline. The purpose of bylaws, as Mr. Mellison said, it should not be intended to prohibit home sharing, but rather create a consistent level of expectations, knowledge, and guidance for property owners and renters alike. But we also need to understand that we have little else to offer in the way of temporary housing. The general intent of temporary housing is to allow for short-term accommodations for various reasons, which include work, weddings, funerals, reunions, sporting tourism. And so due to the lack of other temporary housing opportunities, it would not make sense to limit the number of days in a dwelling unit as has been suggested in this report. For all those different scenarios. Also, if we do put in some sort of regulatory framework, limiting the amount of licenses will limit our amount of resources and funds to be able to sustain that regulatory framework and enforcement. Limiting it to the amount just in the primary dwelling and not any accessory dwellings. I think a lot of people stated that, you know, they prefer the homeowner to be present when they're renting out. So I don't understand why an additional dwelling unit, it would make more sense because you're on the property. So to allow them would be another check mark. Not allowing them on agricultural lands does not make a lot of sense to me, especially when we're talking about agritourism, value-added services, which are widely promoted and encouraged in order to sustain that commodity. These allow for those sectors as well to help offset some of their expenses and stay on their lands. So with the additional dwellings, I would agree that, you know, maybe not using all of the additional dwellings as short-term rentals, but maybe one of the three options. Also, I would like to know that many people that use short-term rentals quite often allowed for a varying time of stays, so I don't even know how we be able to monitor that. Some people will stay for up to 3 months while they're waiting their house to be built. Some are just coming in for a wedding, so there's many different scenarios that can play out. What do I have here? Sorry. A noise bylaw, putting in a noise bylaw that only applies to short-term rent, I believe would be viewed very much as discriminatory. And the real potential to be abused, should it be imposed that way. Permanent residence, as Councillor Wabet stated, I am also in cottage country. I have I have a few short-term rentals on and off for years, which were just normal. But it's a lot of the permanent residents who create a lot of the traffic, a lot of the noise, a lot of the occasions, because that's their home, right? So they could also be causing a disturbance. So I think we have to think about being fair across the board, and I don't know how we would impose such a thing without having a noise bylaw in place. Also, another important note is homeowners have to pay for insurance above and beyond standard insurance that dictates a lot of the infrastructure that has to be in the home, like your smoke detectors, carbon monoxides. That's an insurance issue. We don't, again, have the resources and costs when we're talking about doing fire inspections and things like that. I think that's above and beyond our scope, and what we need to do, that's for insurance companies to delegate. I just feel like this is going to be very expensive if we don't narrow it down to something very starter point, because we don't have a lot of short-term rentals compared to our population size. It's less than 1%. And a lot of these items listed here as possibly being included in the regulation, you would find very much in areas like Muskoka, where 1 in 5 are short-term rentals. We have less than 100 in a population of 8,500. So it seems to me we have a very small subset problem here. And part of that might be the fact that we have some that are just buying up houses to be rentals. And if there's a way we can restrict that to only be allowed to have 1 or 2 even, I don't know if there's a way to restrict the amount and not have multi-corporation type scenario. I think the bylaws should just include references to other bylaws already in place or that need to be in place to give clear guidance of expectations of what is allowed or not in a jurisdiction. And this is consistent with most, if not other, short-term rental bylaws in the province, where they give a clear list of this is the noise bylaw, this is the parking bylaw, this is the streets bylaw, and all that has to be part of the package of when you're going for a license, that they sign off and understand all these regulations. Clearly, it's more of a knowledge and guidance. It'll also allow for better communication with the STRs, which is good. I just think we're just a really open and pleasant community, and I know there's a great deal, the majority of short-term renters are very good, law-abiding, respectful neighbors, and they shouldn't go unnoticed in all this because there's a few bad apples here. So we just have to find a way to make it realistic and start at some sort of baseline and see how it goes.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Bojan?
Your worship. Obviously, a lot going on here, so I'll try to keep my thoughts categorized. The first one I want to start with is, I think the biggest reason these conversations are happening is we all talk about, historical cottage rentals. It's been a thing forever. The biggest difference here and the reason why municipalities everywhere are facing this is because of the ease of online advertising. Before, you rented your cottage to family and friends, you knew who they were. That's why I don't think the issues that we're seeing now are as present as they are now. It's the ease of turning it into an absent landlord rental. I think that's ultimately, to be blunt, that's the conversation we're having here. Can you look at the issues? It's noise, it's parking, it's just generally a lack of respect for the community, whether that's 1, 2, 3 specific ones or all of them. That's kind of why we're having this conversation. I think it's important that time is of the essence. I mean, we've been talking, this town has been talking about it for almost a year and a half, 2 years now. But at the same time, I don't think we can send staff away as of right now to say, go put together a bylaw, because we haven't told them anything of what we're looking for. We haven't told them what we want the definition of a short-term rental to be. We haven't told them if we want to exempt owner occupied or permanent residents from a bylaw. I just feel like it's going to be a waste of resources and staff time if we send them away without a clear understanding, or at least a rough idea of what us as council want to see. Otherwise, we're going to get a bylaw that's this massive framework that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate, and we're going to say no, and all that was a waste. So I think whether that means we need to have a short-term rental special meeting, I know it was in the staff report, or we can somehow do it in a couple hours here. But I really do think that we need to be clear with staff so that there's no waste of time without knowing what we're looking for. I think Councillor Van Claveren brings up a good point. I know there's a couple property management companies, and this is not to specify one or that you're referring to, because I don't know who you're referring to. But I do know that there's lots of management companies that do a great job at advertising, screening tenants, and running the short-term rental on behalf of the person who owns the home. But they're not answering the phone at midnight or 1 a.m. when the neighbor is calling because there's 25 people at the home. There's might be some that are doing that, but I think that's why we're going to be looking at costs no matter what. If we go the route where we just go the same way some municipalities have done, where they say, you know what, let's just go primary residence only, no whole home rentals. And let's say you went that way, you're still going to have an enforcement resources. You're going to have to pay for someone to monitor that, to enforce it if someone's still operating. Because what we're seeing in other municipalities that put that in is they just continue to operate because there's no one there to enforce it. If you go the other way and you have a larger licensing framework, of course, you're going to need resources still as well, because you need someone to actually run the program. So either way, we're looking at money. We're looking whether it's hiring staff or something, because no matter which way you go here, there's going to need to be enforcement. Otherwise, I think someone said it over there. I think that said there's no point in doing anything. That's where I'm at right now. And I don't want to send staff away today at the point we're at right now, because I think we're going to get a lot of time spent from staff, hard time, and we're not going to like what they bring back. So I don't know if we need to look at it.
Well, definitely we need a starting point. That's for sure. And as we said earlier, this has been going on for a long time, but we want to get it right. So if it takes extra time, we have to do it. I believe, Mr. Melanson, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the councillor. I appreciate your comments, Councillor Bojan. And if the feeling of council is that having, I'm going to call it a pre-meeting, if you will, but having a meeting along the lines of what you're suggesting before we get down the road to actually having a firm structure of a regulatory framework is helpful. I don't think the motion that's before you necessarily precludes that, because we've left the way forward to get to that framework pretty broad. And so I think we could build that into the process. One of the things we had hoped to do today, but unfortunately due to some miscommunication that wasn't possible, was to have one of the consultants who assisted with the official plan review, John Henricks, attend in case there were some in-depth questions, because if some of the members of council who were here previously and involved in the OP review will recall that John and his colleague Mary Lou were the principal consultants who led and responded to questions of council. John, particularly in his experience related to short-term vacation rentals. Unfortunately, due to a miscommunication, he wasn't able to make it for this evening, but has said he would be available for any future needs. And we've had him on standby, and we've been also working with him through this process to get some suggestions and thoughts and ideas. So certainly if council wanted to have a pre-discussion with staff to give some more specific direction, I think that's fine, because at the end of the day, the public meeting that is required under the Planning Act is the opportunity for the public, should council vote to move forward to do something. That's the public's opportunity to then react to that and give comments, notwithstanding the fact there's nothing that stops the public from continuing to provide feedback through staff, through the town, through this process regardless. And we've been receiving the comments from the public through this process, as council is aware. I think Randy mentioned that earlier. So I just wanted to offer that up to say that we've left this process forward to a regulatory frame very broad. And if that sort of meeting that you're suggesting, Councillor Bojan, is helpful, then we can work with your clerk to figure that out before we ever get to a point of here's the actual planning, the zoning bylaw amendments and regulatory framework, if that helps.
Councillor Bojan?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And I guess, so for example, we've talked about people who live in the house, they rent bedrooms or they rent in-law suites, or people rent their home for 1, 2, 3 months for employment. I don't think anyone here would argue that wouldn't fit the definition of what we're looking to address here. So I think making sure those definitions are clear, that, in my opinion, are not part of the short-term rental discussion. The 28 days or less would be what we're looking at. And I think there was another thought I had there. I'm trying to read my notes here. Oh, I also, there's an opportunity here. I mean, we're talking months to do a licensing framework, let alone if there needs to be resources added, human resources added. There's also an option here to have it where if we're thinking that we can't have a framework in place because it's going to be complex and there's going to be resources required and it's going to take longer than the spring, we can at least look at something like having mandatory registration right now, where all current short-term rentals who meet the definition of whatever short-term rental is, they have to at least do mandatory registration where they tell us their address of the short-term rental, the phone number and email or contact information for the owner, the owner's name, and we go even add, do they use a property management company if we wanted to. Something that we have a database to start with, and then we can be transparent that is part one and a second phase is likely coming. But at least we're doing something to start that database and have a direct line of communication. So once we do have a framework in place or a framework coming, we can communicate directly with that database of registered short-term rentals. It's just another option that will be a lot quicker than drafting a licensing framework, have a registration bylaw, which is another option as well. That's kind of all I have for right now. Thank you.
Councillor Rodriguez, then Councillor Wolbeck, you have a question?
So if we do go to a pre-consult meeting, I'd like to see that involved the costs and that would come out of putting in this to help us get a clearer picture.
Councillor Wolbeck?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Alec, fellow council, I really appreciate your comments there, and I know you were the author of short-term rentals in another community, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's an absolutely great suggestion that we start off by registration and stuff like that, start slowly, get something going. And we really figure out where this whole thing's going. As I said in my opening remarks earlier, this is a lot more complicated. This is a complicated situation, and we need to do it right. And with Councilor Rodriguez, we do need to know the cost, because, you know, I'm looking in here, you know, I'm looking at a question here about, like, how would noise be enforced? Will the bylaw enforcement officers be tasked with working 11 PM to 7 AM, or will it be contracted out to the OPP? Well, if you make a bylaw, a noise bylaw, that's our cost. That's no longer the OPP's responsibility, just so people understand that. That's, even the OPP would like us to have a noise bylaw so they can step out the situation, and we hire our own bylaw officer, which we have determined would cost pretty good sum of money to have a, you know, $50,000 plus a year to have a bylaw officer. And I don't know what that plus would be, but it would be significant. So the starting point would get them registered, and reading another municipality, they have to register, and there's consequences if they don't. And I mean, you know, significant consequences in dollar amounts if they refuse to register. So there's ways to get this kicked off and started, and let us get moving on with some of the recommendations. And finally, like, we need to keep this in perspective. As I said earlier, there are people here that depend, their income depends on it, keeping their house depends on it. And we need to address that. And I think you mentioned in-laws and, you know, guests coming and stuff. That's, geez, we don't want to step on that. You know, if you're going to have a family reunion and you're going to keep some guests in your house, we gotta be real careful in this out. We're not stepping on that kind of stuff. So I think this is a great start, and my expectation of this today was exactly what you've done here. Is our planners have given us the report that we requested, and now we need to go as a council and figure out what we're going to take out of it and what we're not. So this is what we've been asking for, and we have it. I don't think it's decision-making time whatsoever at this point. So, and the meeting, it's going to have to happen. We needed to hear what the public had to say in these meetings, and we got it here percentage wise. So good job. And but I do need to think there's more work to be done.
Definitely. Councilor Van Claveren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it appropriate to have staff search out qualified contractors? You know, what they do, how they charge, how many units they have, do they have references? I just can't help think we're reinventing the wheel already. That some contractors are already implementing and dealing with all these issues, and I see the tab increasing as time marches on. And I think if we don't know what we don't know, then we spend a lot of money to try and figure it out. And I wonder if staff could search out some contractors and provide us something.
Mr. Melanson.
Through your worship, I was actually going to speak to Councillor Wolvet's comment. I'm not sure, perhaps Mr. Sabansky wants to speak to Councillor Van Claveren's issue since he addressed it to start.
Okay. How about we go back to Mr. Sabansky, directed to Mr. Van Claveren's remarks, then I'll come back to you, Councillor Wolvet.
I don't think there's any hurt in talking to local contractors and what the services they provide. How they provide those services, how they get compensated for those services. Just for information purposes, we can work as we work towards whatever other initiatives get approved tonight. We can also work towards getting some information in regards to those contractors. So at least that we're researching all the information and not ruling out any one possibility.
Particularly the hot button issues like noise, parking, late hours, too many people, all that type of thing.
Mr. Melanson, back to you for Councillor Wolvet's comments.
Thank you, your worship. To you, Councillor, I will say, first of all, thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. And if you haven't noticed, I'm quite sure that Randy's been feverishly taking notes. If I look like I'm looking down, I'm feverishly typing on my cell phone to take notes because I don't have any paper here. So we're trying to record all of your comments and your feedback to help move us along. And to say that this process has helped staff to understand this issue, but also how to really engage the public on issues moving forward, would be an understatement, because we didn't do a lot of public engagement, like open houses and things like that. We've now built up a toolkit and level of experience. I think I go back to what I said earlier, from Councillor Bojan, that we're available to do a meeting with council to kind of discuss what some of your thoughts are on the future of what this would look like. I want council to understand, though, that we are specifically dealing with, through this regulatory framework, short-term vacation rentals. So I just want to make sure that that everyone who's watching and that is out there, things like you have family members coming and visiting, that's not going to get covered under this. You know, that's your family coming to visit. That is your own situation. That's not something that is a tenancy related matter. And we're not dealing with that in any way. It will look at the difference between a long-term rental situation, where if I put an additional unit in my basement and I rent that out to Randy for a year, that's not going to get covered by short-term. That's more of a long-term rental, and it's different. So we do want to try to make sure that we're issue specific if we're going to go down any road. But I think council also needs to understand, and I'm hearing this from some of you, there are costs involved. There are going to be resources needed, and those costs are going to be there. And you do need to be prepared for the fact that if you're going to set up a system, it needs to be enforced.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Melanson. Councillor Rodriguez.
So I just wanted to add that when I was at AMO last week, there was Airbnb vendor. Did you notice that? Yes. And I spoke to them briefly, and they said that they have actually been talking to us helping to provide some input as well. And they might be someone who's also beneficial in what they're doing to help the situation.
Your worship, if I may. So I did stop at the booth there as I attended to AMO with yourselves. I did collect all their information and have a brief conversation with them, and that information has been forwarded on to planning. So yeah, Airbnb is offering a 24/7 customers or neighbor service line where neighbors can call Airbnb and complain about over parking, over too much noise, over occupancy, etc. And Airbnb will then prompt the host to take care of the situation. So there is that available, and we were looking to update our website with some of that information to ensure that the adjacent property owners have the most up-to-date information if there is an issue with an Airbnb short-term rental.
Mr. Sabansky, Councilor Lovett.
Can I just do a follow-up question to Adam?
Sure.
How do we know who's an Airbnb and who's not an Airbnb? Like, do they have signs out front, or like anything? How would we define who that is?
The only way you could do that is probably to go online and pick a date in a slow time of year and search out which ones are Airbnbs. Most of the neighbors will know whether it's a Vrbo or an Airbnb per se. And then that will give them an idea of where to go for the customer service line. We have we posted that it's an Airbnb, but we don't necessarily know unless we go searching through the Airbnb platform to find out if it's an Airbnb or a Vrbo or what service they use to rent their property.
So the people in here that have short-term rentals beside, do you know whether they're an Airbnb or not an Airbnb? I didn't think so. So you wouldn't know who you're calling. That's my point. How do you identify?
That might be a good question, pardon me, when you're chatting with the contractors.
Council, any further discussion, Council? I know we've had a lot of our residents that have, and we do thank them for sending in the correspondence, because it's very helpful for us while making our decision and as we move forward in this process. I'm only repeating myself, but I said earlier, we want to get this right, and it's through your input and what we have to work with that will help us very much as well. Although we have no delegations requesting this evening, I am willing to use my discretion and allow 3 speakers if somebody would like to speak on it in the crowd as a courtesy, because you have been good enough to come out. You're good enough to have gone to our open houses that we've had. Hear your viewpoint. As you can, it will only be on what the report is tonight. I don't want to wander off because we've all had that opportunity to share your thoughts. As well as not only on paper, but at the 2 sessions that we have had. And it sounds like we're going to be having another one possibly coming up as well, that council will be able to sit in on as well. So if there's anybody that would like to address this report right now, I will allow you 5 minutes. Yes, ma'am, if you would like to stand and identify yourself and share that. Please.
Hi, I'm Betty Williams, and I have a short-term rental beside me. And they have a company that comes in and looks after it. Where people come in for one night. And I walk out in my yard and get attacked by a dog. This has happened to me twice. In my own yard, had a dog come running at me, hackles up, barking and nasty. And when I complained, they said, well, you know, they weren't supposed to have a dog. They told me they didn't have a dog. So they did. And this has happened more than once and nothing's been done. So things can happen over and over and over again. And they're only there for one night. So those people, they never do it again. But the next person comes in and they do. You can't control that. I live in a residential area. Every home in that area is a home. We've raised children there. There's young children across the street. They're afraid for their children. We're afraid now that we're seniors to have strangers walking through our yard, and they do. And you can't protect me from that. You can't. We don't want them there. And yes, most of the people are very nice people. They are. But it only takes a few. You know, you only have to have one guy come and beat you up. You only have to get bitten by one dog. And there's nothing that you can do about that. You can have these people come in and they're contractors, and who's paying them? The guy with the short-term rental is paying their bills. They're paying them. And you think they're going to be in there for me? No. It's my word against theirs, and they're going to take theirs. It's not going to be my word. I think there's places here that you can have short-term rentals, and that is in the cottage areas. And we do have cottage areas, but in a residential area where we're all trying to be families, and we have a really nice community, and you're ruining it. And we're all upset about that. And in the 2 years that you've been talking about how you're going to do something about this, how many more short-term rentals have popped up in subdivisions and rec communities? You wait another year and we're going to have 3 more? Like, you're just going to keep letting them do it? If you drag your feet long enough, we're going to have lots of them. Yeah. And I don't think that that's right. I don't think that's fair. If you had done something about this 2 years ago, we wouldn't have one beside us. But you didn't do anything. You dragged your feet. You see, you want to get it right. Sarnia's got it right. They've done it. It's gone through court. They've won their battles. You're not inventing the wheel here. Let's look at what other communities have done and say, hey, it works for them. They've gone through courts and they've won, and the people are happy. So why don't you go with that? They have it in communities where there's cottages. They have them in commercial areas, but in a residential area, no, they don't have them. And they don't build a Holiday Inn in a commercial or in a residential area either. You won't see them build a hotel in the middle of a subdivision because people don't want that. They don't want to feel unsafe. And you're taking my safety away by allowing them to be there. I don't think that's right. I built that house 30 years ago and I get to live there And now you're gonna say, oh, well, sorry, but they wanna make money. So we're gonna let them do that and you're gonna take my safety away? You're gonna ruin my home that I built? So I can't live there anymore because I won't live there beside a short-term rental. I'll move to Sarnia where they don't allow them to ruin a community. But I won't live beside a short-term rental and have to be afraid all the time. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
My name's John Kreitzman. I live at 3714 Beverly Glen. I live on a 50-foot wide municipal roadway, which is unassumed. The only way into where this little street is a 66-foot wide municipal roadway, which is also unassumed. I have an Airbnb next to me. And so we have multiple visits throughout the year. The property is 50 feet wide. There are mostly 50-foot wide lots on this little strip. There are no fences. And as the previous person has indicated, pets wander. And yes, it's an Airbnb and it's stated that no pets are allowed. And when you try to contact the gentleman who owns this place, who lives in Sarnia, he's busy at the plants working. And so I appreciate very much the concern you have. My concern is this neighborhood is a very established old neighborhood of very close cottage type homes with a few more elaborate ones in between. Very close to us, we have a large development going on. Queen Street is being developed very quickly. The pressures that are building in the neighborhood are great. And none of those people would want an Airbnb beside them. In fact, a new owner who just moved in across from this Airbnb wasn't aware it was there. And they are now aghast to find this there. The parking consists of a slab of concrete out front where the vehicles are invariably sitting on the right of way. And there's room for 4 vehicles, but there are often more people than that. So my point is that I am in cottage country and it would be helpful to have parameters that state what is permitted and what is not permitted. The place is managed by a management company or some maintenance company. The only thing they do is roar through the place and cut the grass, and that's as much as they do, and spray some weed killer, which happens to get a little bit straight from time to time. So, Your Worship, I would suggest that the suggestion of Mr. Bogan is a very relevant suggestion. You need to come up with some workable parameters, and the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented. And when council can come to some consensus that yes, these things we could work with, bring them forward. The people who live beside these kinds of places will be grateful. We pay our taxes, we pay a good amount of tax on an unassumed roadway. I am part of the road crew that fixes the potholes on the street, and the extra traffic that comes in has no concern about it whatsoever. The owner does not live in the unit, and it's a free-for-all. So thank you for the time, and that's all I have to say. I so sympathize with this person.
I have a gentleman in the back with the Green Bay Packers.
I'm Jim Coleman. I live at Blue Point. I've lived there 53 years. Okay. It's a residential community. That's not the Holiday Inn type. Okay. We put a petition in on July the 2nd, 2020. Here we are, still going at it. Okay. Our official plan for our little hamlet there states right on it, no commercial. Okay. Tell me that a short-term rental getting $500-600 a night is not commercial when we never see the owners. They're out of towners. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, you have something or are you? Okay. I thought you had your hand up, Mr. Poland. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, everyone. My name is Laura Markslag. I am from Guelph. I bought a little cottage out here 2.5 years ago. A place where I could come with my daughter in summer and enjoy the water and get out of the city. I'd like to say I'm very sorry to hear all of these experiences. They sound terrible. I myself am at the cottage part-time, and when I'm not there, I do rent it out. I have it on Airbnb. I joined Airbnb in 2016 because when I travel, I like to get to know the communities. I like to eat local. I like to meet people. I like to do local things. I do not want to stay at a Holiday Inn. I don't want to go downtown. I don't want to go shopping. So for me, it was a way to meet communities. I probably stayed at about 20 all throughout Canada and the US, and I fell in love with the concept because I could be local. So I moved into my little place. It was very rundown. I had to cut down about 7 huge trees. There was no gardens. It was a mess. It was rented from time to time, vacant. And I've put in a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars to make it beautiful, to make it wonderful. In order to pay for these upgrades and make it fit into the community, I do rent it out part-time. Who rents it? Some people on Airbnb, my neighbors, when they have family visiting and don't have space, they've been ill, needed people to come visit. People who come on mission trips have come to stay with me. People who are waiting for houses to be built. They've stayed 4 weeks. Oh, not built yet, not built yet, not built yet. 6 weeks. Someone doing an apprenticeship with large machinery. People doing work in town. They've stayed 6 weeks. So I've had lots of different people. I get to know them. I write them a welcome note, handwritten by me. I have a very good way of communicating with them. And in the 2.5 years that I have had this rental, I haven't had a single issue, not one. My neighbors love the people that come. I've got a lot of repeat people that come. I'm very strict. I've got 4 people max. And if you have children, you can add up to 2. There's only space for 2 cars. I talk to the people before I even accept them. And I say, who is it you're coming with? What are your expectations? And if there are more people, that is grounds for immediate eviction. If there's a noise complaint, immediate eviction. And I talk with them. I only have one place. It's just me. And I don't have a lot of rentals. But I do have part-time on Airbnb and it's working beautifully. My neighbors are happy. All my neighbors are retired, all of them. They enjoy the fact that they can have family come and stay with me. I'm here this week with my daughter and we get to go and enjoy and we can pay the bills. We can pay for the new roof. We've done all the gardening, all the transplanting, and we've made it into a beautiful, beautiful spot. Whereas before it was really run down and an eyesore. And I'm looking at when I'm busy at work, I'm a teacher. So when I'm at work and I'm not within 30 minutes away, I'm looking at a property management company that can help me, that can be the eyes and the ears when I'm not here. I've told this property management company, I don't want any problems with neighbors. I want to make sure that we don't disrupt, that we are part of the community. And they seem to have the same goal that I do. You're not going to hear from people who are happy, right? No one's going to come here and say, we're really happy with the way this is going, but you're going to hear when there's problems. And I'm very sorry that your neighbors have not been treating you well. But where I am in Errol Creek, it's going really well. And my neighbors, we get along really well. We visit, we text each other. They also let me know if there's anything. And it's been an awesome experience. So I'd like to see it continue. Okay. And if you have any questions, you can let me know.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I believe there's somebody at the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name's Sean Parker and I've been in Plympton-Wyoming my whole life. Grew up 4629 Lakeside Street, Hillcrest Heights. Currently reside on Cullen Drive. So I am a property manager for short-term rentals. Long story short, we bought our first one in 2020. I think like a lot of what the owners that I'm hearing right now, didn't know what we were doing. Bought it thinking there was going to be this cash flow and it was going to help us with, we had young kids and I was working at Imperial Oil and yada, yada, yada. But so we started this company. We only had the 2 rentals. And it was to do a better job of like our neighborly conduct. So we have our 2, they're Blue Point Bay. And the goal was to let's run this as a 24/7 like a hotel. So that we're available. And then we can avoid the disturbances to our neighbors. It kind of grew from there, and now we do manage about 40 to 50 in the area between Kimlaki and Grand Bend. But we're always learning. We do like to keep really good rapport with our neighbors. We want to make sure that people are there, are talking to the neighbors, what's going on. Have you had any complaints? Is parking an issue? Just stuff like that. I know in Blue Point Bay, we're on the neighborhood text list, so they know that if there's something going on, they can text Jill and myself. And yeah, so that's kind of how we're operating. We are at 24/7. We're available 2 a.m. For noise complaints. A lot of places we suggest have cameras, whether it's Ring doorbells, stuff like that, so that if we're not there, we can monitor the number of people there. They didn't say we don't allow dogs, they showed up with a dog, stuff like that. I guess what I'm saying is I like working in the community. I've lived in the community my whole life. I really believe that regulation is needed for stuff like this. I don't think it's right that we have people that maybe live 2-3 hours away or aren't available 24/7, because they should be operated like a hotel or Holiday Inn. And that's our goal with our 2 and with the other 40 or so we run.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you for your thoughts. Yes, sir.
My name is Alex Deemer. I live out at Blue Point. I've submitted something in writing. I've attended sessions. I've listened to everybody today, so thank you very much for your time and giving me this opportunity. I find it very interesting that a lot of the activity jumped to commercial, and how do we allow commercial happen? If I said I wanted to have 5 kitchens on the lake, delivery, and make them restaurants, I don't know if you'd be so easily accepting of that. But we're saying, hey, this is your home, people want to rent it out. Glad for people to rent out their home. It's called bed and breakfast. You live there. We have a relationship as neighbors with the owner. If someone in your own home is doing something while you're living there, you take care of it. That's a great thing. Love to see that continue. People who are supplying homes for apprentices, other people, another room in their house, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, great. Another good thing, again, the owner is living there. How have other municipalities addressed short-term rentals? Get rid of short-term rental, minimum 30-day stay. You want to avoid the regulatory headache that you have? Don't allow people to rent by the day, by the weekend. You have $500 a day for 16 weeks. It's $100,000. You want to tax that to pay for your bylaw officer? Go ahead. They'll have to charge $600 now. There's no excuse not to have money, but you're going to increase our taxes for the rest to police something that shouldn't be happening in a residential area. There are not supposed to be commercial activities. So that's the first stop. You wouldn't build a house in a woodlot. You just said that at the beginning of the meeting, but now we're considering allowing commercial activity. Do we adjust it? Bed and breakfast allows the easy, long-term regulations allow for the length. Okay, you get rid of the headache by managing the 2 things there. That's all I really have to say.
Thank you for your. Okay, council, we have a motion on the floor. I'll read it again. It's moved by Councillor Rodriguez, seconded by Councillor Bojan, that the report by Randy Burke, planner, dated August the 3rd, 2023, regarding short-term rentals, public engagement summary, and the next step received, the staff be instructed to proceed as presented. Everybody clear on the motion? All those in favor? Yes.
I'm not very clear on the.
I was the same.
The next steps be received and staff be instructed to proceed as presented. What are they?
Randy, do you want to read that for us, please?
Thank you, your worship, for you. So the next steps would be for council to direct staff to take the next steps in the process. This would include, well, in the report, it states that this would include preparing a zoning bylaw and licensing framework for presentation to council. However, it sounds maybe a consultation, meeting, maybe the next step. I think the framework here can be, as Ken said earlier, loosely interpreted to fit the needs of council specifically. So if meeting before that is of the wishes, then that can be within the next steps as well. Along with that, the report does state that a public meeting will also need to be scheduled for the public to provide their comments to council as well. I think Ken has his hands up too.
Mr. Melanson?
Yes, through your worship, thank you. Just to suggest an option, and I'm going to need the clerk to chime in to help me here. As Randy suggested, we've tried to keep the process broad, so I think we still can move forward with what Councillor Bojan has suggested. And what that would look like is the process to get to the public meeting. So that would be become meeting number 2. There would be another meeting in advance of that. That would be a more that would be a discussion with council about how could this system work? What would your expectations be? Sort of like a first step, second step, etc. I don't think that you need to change the motion because, quite frankly, your direction today has been quite clear, at least in my opinion. But if you were wanting to do the belts and braces, I think you just amend your motion to say as directed by council as of today's date. I think that would be okay, Madam Clerk.
Your worship, I agree, it can be done either way. Sorry, can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry.
I agree, it can be done either way. If the mover and seconder wants to amend the motion, we can say to proceed as directed at this meeting. And my minutes clearly indicate that council wants that interim meeting before a full public fulsome meeting happens. So if council feel better having that right in the motion, as long as Councillor Rodriguez and Councillor Bojan are okay with that amendment.
Councillor Bojan, then Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you. Given the nature of, I mean, we all talk about timely of this. I mean, previous council's been dealing with this. This council's dealing with this. I think we at least owe it to the people here and people watching and people who have been coming to these open houses that there's a clear path of what this council wants to do. And since I'm on the motion, I would like to see it a little bit clearer that perhaps the next step is a special council meeting, public can attend. It's not a public meeting, but it's a council meeting, so public can attend. I mean, we got to make a decision. So let's have a meeting, figure out what direction we want to give to staff. At that point, staff can then be directed in that meeting to draft a bylaw, depending on what conversations happen. And at that point, we can have a public meeting for the public to comment on the draft bylaw. I'm just trying to think, right now it just sounds super confusing and it sounds like we're dragging it out longer and I don't want to do that. I don't think anyone on this council wants to do that. So I'd like to see it a little bit more streamlined, a little more clear that the next step is perhaps a special council meeting to discuss short-term rental bylaw. And then out of that meeting, we would direct staff to draft whatever we decide to do. And then there's a public meeting to provide input on that framework. I personally like the sounds of that, but I'm open to my colleagues.
Well, I think that's a good idea, but Councillor Rodriguez, you were on that motion too. You okay?
Yes, I'm in complete agreement with Councillor Bojan. So do you write all that in that motion, or do you just write that the next meeting is to define what the first steps of a bylaw are going to be, and then bring that to the public.
The clerk is going to,
I think the motion be as directed, as long as Aaron.
The as directed. If somebody's just reading that, they're gonna know what as directed as of today meant unless they go watch a YouTube video. So I think it needs to be more defined.
Your worship, Mr. Melanson has his hand.
yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Melanson?
Thank you, your worship. I'm trying to make this easy for the clerk, but the intention of what I had suggested where it would be proceed as directed for today is essentially what Councillor Bojan has spoken about, to have that interim meeting where we will sit down with council, and I suspect we will give you a presentation. We'll have Mr. Henricks from MPG there in case you have any questions that he might be able to assist with. And then the intention from that meeting is council to give us direction as to how to proceed with the framework moving forward. I hope I captured everything, Councillor Bojan, that you were suggesting, but that was the way I was trying to frame it. If you want to get very specific in the motion, I don't think that's incorrect for the sake of, the record, but that's certainly what staff are taking to be the direction.
Okay with that, Councillor Rodriguez, because you were on.
Yeah, I guess we don't, hopefully, got all that.
I'm trying not to write it on the actual motion because then
Yeah,
if you guys
case,
change
yeah,
your mind,
yeah.
so if I get this right. So that Randy's report be received and regarding short-term rentals, public engagement summary. And staff be instructed to schedule a special council meeting to further discuss the regulation of short-term rentals. To inform staff in their next steps going forward towards regulation and a public meeting.
Are we okay on this side with that?
Okay. And I just.
Yes, go right ahead.
And mover and seconder.
Well, we want to do it. I'd like to make sure we have all councillors here.
Right.
So I know there's a couple that are. One's away right now, the others, so we'll have to. Do it short.
Just that time keeps moving on.
I think it's only. Yes, we'll lock it down tonight.
Read my writing.
Okay, council, here's the motion. As adjusted. Moved by Councilor Rodriguez, seconded by Councilor Bojan. That the report by Randy Burke, planner dated August the 3rd, 2023. Regarding short-term rentals, public engagement summary and next steps be received and staff be instructed. To schedule a special council meeting to further discuss the regulation of STRs to inform staff in the next steps towards presenting a regulation bylaw to council and hold,
Council for consideration.
to council for consideration and hold a public meeting. Are we all clear on that? Okay, all those in favor? Period. Good, that's fine, no, you did okay. Okay, council, we're going to, anything on number 7.1 bylaws?
Not at this time.
Number 8, correspondence.
No correspondence action required.
Let's go to the nine, nine. 9-1.
Take it easy.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Brett.
Motion by Deputy Mayor McEwen, seconded by Councillor Van Claveren. The correspondence items A to B. Relating to recommended reading and routine approval and information items not otherwise addressed by resolution. Noted it's received by the Plympton-Wyoming Council and filed accordingly. For council, that's the Committee of Adjustment notices as well as decisions. Any questions on that? All those in favor? Carried. Okay, new business planning. We're gonna start with Councillor Bojan.
Nothing from me.
Councillor Rodriguez,
No, sorry. It was, what. Kind of wanted to share that.
I'm sure. So during the significant weather event that occurred last week, Highland Glen did receive a large amount of rain, as much of the northern area of our municipality did. So the culvert that drains the swale that comes along the roadway and from the forest at Highland Glen, that then goes through the break wall into the lake. With the amount of flow coming through, it pushed up the culvert. So now it's sticking out at about a 45-degree angle. Gordon Marine has been contacted and they will be on site repairing the culvert. Included in that repair will be driving down two piles alongside either end of the culvert and then strapping it down so that the future water pressure during a weather event does not force it up out of the soil. So that work should be starting very shortly and should not take them very long to complete.
any questions? Okay. Anything else, Councillor Rodriguez?
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor? Councillor Van Claveren?
Not for me, sir. Thank you.
Councillor Wolbeck?
Not for me, sir.
Okay, I have nothing under new business as well for planning relating tonight. Before we go to our closed meeting session, I want to say thank you and say, I'm gonna miss her, but Isabella, this is her last evening with us. She's going back to school in England, I believe it is. And we wish you safe travels and the very best. And maybe we'll see you again, hopefully.
Thank you.
Forget us.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed my time here. Thank you for having me.
You certainly filled in well for our planning job.
And clapping for you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I have a motion by Deputy Mayor McEwen, seconded by Councillor Van Claveren. Council moved to an in-camera meeting of council pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended for the following reasons. Item A. Personal matters. Section 239, bracket 2, bracket B, personal matters about identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Item B and C, employee matters, section 239, bracket 2, bracket D, labor relations or employee negotiations. All those in favor? Carried.